Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Leather and Lace podcast, where we intend to disrupt the narratives of separation and seek common ground and unity in an ever polarizing world. I am Joanna, and I am joined by my co-host, Ken. And this week we are talking about science and spirituality. Can these two polarizing perspectives ever get along? I mean, it just seems that the relationship between science and spirituality is often framed as adversarial, as if they were Drake and Kendrick Lamar or pickleball and tennis, which pickleball is obviously better than tennis. I will die on that hill. But hey, what if science and spirituality were actually more like yin and yang, two halves of the same whole? Science and spirituality together can deepen our understanding of what reality is and how it works. Because together, they can move us beyond the physical to explore the dimensions that the materialist perspective, which can be kind of obstinate and stubborn, alone, they can't fully explain. So, separately, science and spirituality have done their thing and they've been able to give us a good idea of how reality works separately. But a science and spirituality collab, hey, that could lead us to answers about the universe and ourselves that we can't even imagine yet. Like, who wouldn't be interested in that? So, without further ado, let's get this show started and we'll jump right back in after this. All right, so why should we care about bridging the gap between science and spirituality if they've been able to do their thing as is? Well, actually, science, which is bound by a strict materialist perspective, struggles to explain a reality that is shaped not only by the physical, but also by unseen forces that are beyond its current reach because it is so materially dogmatic. They have their limitations. And I know that they don't often express that, but there are limitations to science. So, for a more complete and holistic understanding of our reality, which I'm sure a lot of us would like, we don't want to have any limitations on our understanding of what the heck is going on. Maybe it's time we start looking at science and spirituality as complementary forces and talk about how science and spirituality can move from a standoff to something more like a symphony. Because let's face it, facts without meaning is just cold, and meaning without structure is chaos. So, just like our podcast theme represents leather and lace, there's something about blending the masculine and the feminine energies. Okay. Because without each other, they are often incomplete and limited. So, yeah, Ken, let's talk about why bridging the gap between these two worlds isn't just an intellectual exercise, but it's actually a necessary shift that we need to make for our evolution.
It is such a necessary shift and great introduction, Joanna. This
Thanks.
is this is an awesome topic, I think, to be kicking off the podcast with because it first off it spans the entire history of humanity. You know, we've always had some sort of spiritual or religious practice as far back as we can look. And man has always analyzed the elements of his material reality in some way, back to the cavemen staring at rocks and figuring out how to make hammers and weapons out of them. That's you could say in some way, shape, or form a scientific application as well. So this is an ages-old divide that has always existed, and we could point the finger at the religious dogmatics going back even a couple thousand years, and the councils that met several hundred years after the death of Christ and came up with the books of the Bible and the things and the ways that we were going to reflect on what God is, what reality is, how we are or are not able to connect with the divine and therefore our spiritual nature. And a lot of times folks want to get into a sort of antagonistic and
Mhm.
conspiratorial even type discussion about these types of things. hopefully we can avoid most of that. Certainly those elements do exist historically, but it seems to me that we're finally getting into a place now where individuals in these different paradigms or schools of thought are at least allowing themselves the opportunity to open up to new viewpoints, new ways of looking at the world. And they're also beginning to recognize and openly acknowledge that the ways that they have of measuring, viewing, and articulating their version or their perspective on reality is not holistic.
Mhm.
Really, that's what this entire conversation is about, is only by merging the human experience in all the ways that it is being accomplished can we hope to have a holistic view of what reality, what what human nature, what life experience is really all about. Johnny, you touched on the materialistic nature of science. It is that way for a reason. You know, 300 or so years ago, there were a group of very curious individuals who began to understand, and their minds began to get, in fact, we call it the Enlightenment period. They began to, for whatever reason, start to understand that the conceptual ways in which the church was attempting to explain reality, and one of the best examples is the earth-centric model, where essentially at that time it was stated that the earth was created by God in 7 days, and then and was the center of the entire universe, and no other view was allowed at that time. And then scientists started developing things like telescopes and measuring the universe, and they were looking out and doing their calculations and realizing, wait a minute, that's
Maybe
not
not.
that's not what it looks like to me.
Mm.
Um, and the funny thing was they couldn't just report those results and change viewpoints. There we actually had to go through a period of in some cases dozens or hundreds of years before the viewpoint was entirely accepted that okay, our measurements on the materialistic side actually have led to a revision
Mhm.
in the way that we understand the entirety of this reality. So science has continued along, I think, that path for the last several hundred years, taking ownership and a great deal of pride, and probably rightfully so,
Mhm.
in the ways in which it has been able to measure and understand and articulate in ever refined detail down to the atomic and all the way out to the farthest reaches of the galaxies in the universe, which we can measure right now. And great things have happened, great technological innovations, all kinds of amazing things that we've learned about life on this planet and off of this planet. Um, and yet we've arrived at a time now where we realize that we've hit a literal brick wall in almost every one of those areas. When you look at subdividing the atom, we've hit a
Mhm.
brick wall in describing and defining what those subatomic particles are, what they're made of, how they operate, how they interrelate. The same thing is happening in measurement of the most distant galaxies and black holes. We essentially have hit an area now where we understand that the black holes, the way that we're measuring and viewing them right now, are violating what we previously knew to be unbreakable laws of the universe. And so the essential understanding now is that there must be more. There must be something more that's happening underneath or behind or in some other aspect of this reality that science just does not have the view on. The spiritual side of the house has been saying all along, well, that's what we experience. That's what we feel and experience and see and have access to and insight on. And that side of the equation from a gathering and including that data into scientific analysis has basically been dismissed up until now.
It almost feels that um, maybe there's a sense of like PTSD from what we've been able to rescue ourselves from through science, from the religious tyranny of the past, where they did
Mm-hmm.
things like the Inquisition and cut off Galileo's finger and imprisoned him and essentially killed him for even suggesting the that the sun is actually the center of the universe. So there's a lot of trauma there, a collective trauma. And which makes sense, right? So that's why perhaps there's an element of that, of why there's such a hesitance to allow, spirituality in, even though spirituality is much different from religious dogma, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there is a distinction too, I think, between um, somebody who's strictly following something that's been provided to them by a book or a speaker,
Hmm.
and somebody who has actually gone and actually begin to understand and experience these phenomena, we'll call them, on a personal and experiential level. Um, and so, really, you could say you have now, just in this discussion already, three different schools of thought that could be all competing in sort of a triangle of aggression instead of just the duality that we had initially described, making it even more complicated. So, the question we're going to look at today is there a way that these two or three, if we're going to include religion as a separate and distinct area of thought,
Well,
can they get along?
yeah, I think I only brought up religion because it might be conflated with spirituality, and that
Okay.
it's religious tyranny that kind of gives us this PTSD, this trauma from our
Mm,
past that we don't want to revisit. And maybe
yeah.
that's the fear, this implicit fear with like melding science and spirituality. It's like going backwards or something, when no, it's actually progress, because spirituality is not religious tyranny, it's not religion, it's something else. It's just entertaining um things that are not seen, and that doesn't
Mm.
work with science and their strictly materialist perspective. So
So,
yeah.
so do you think there's a parallel there between our entire focus is on the masculine and feminine paradigm? Do you see one as being more masculine generally and one being more feminine?
Yeah, I think because science is so much about the material and what is observable, that feels a lot more structured and masculine. And then spirituality, the fact that it deals with things like consciousness and things that can't be seen, intuition, near-death experiences, it seems boundless, and it can feel chaotic if there's no lines, right, to kind of box and make sense of some of these things. And so I feel like spirituality is accepting of that, and I think is more welcoming to introduce science and integrate with it because it seeks some kind of structure. Whereas science, I feel, is a little less open to something like that because they are very much devoted to what is observable, what is provable, which again, no, in order, like, calling for them to be integrated isn't supposed to disparage one or the other. Like, we're not disparaging science for being this way. In fact, we're trying to understand why. And that's why I brought up, maybe it's this trauma from the religious tyranny that is keeping us so much like, no, 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 we can't mix these two things, because we're conflating religion with spirituality when it's not the same thing. We've graduated from that. Thank you, science. We have graduated from that. And that was a beautiful thing, to kind of move past that and have science kind of bring us out of those dark ages. And in fact, science, in the beginning, its goal was to understand God, was to understand creation. And now we kind of left that objective in the dust. And now it's just about the pursuit of knowledge. And I think it's gotten into, whereas before it was like a light masculine, exhibiting the light attributes of ownership, of, we're going to take control of our own destiny, and not leave it to these priests or whatever. But it's kind of turned into more of the shadow elements of the masculine, where there's tyranny and control now too. It's like, that's ironic, because it's almost like that's what we were trying to escape or transition from with like religious tyranny. And now we have this, like, it might not feel as tyrannical as the church did. I mean, science isn't killing people, I don't think, on purpose to just kind of keep their dogma alive. But it feels limited almost intentionally, you
Mm.
know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and so I don't want to get too accusatory, but I could probably think of some examples where the over application of scientific principles has led to deaths that would have otherwise been preventable had we incorporated more of a feminine, intuitive, compassionate approach. The development of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, both on the production of energy side and on the production of defensive and offensive weapons, has certainly led to thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths. And there's a lot that we still don't know about what nuclear force, nuclear energy actually is. And yet we continue to, on the, again, very masculinely dominated, profit motivated side, make this assertion that the future of the largest portion of power that's going to be provided to humanity is still nuclear. We've had multiple nuclear reactors fail over the course of the last 20 years and create all sorts of havoc in the areas in which those failures have occurred, as well as probably effects on our atmosphere and the land and water on this planet that's going to last for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. Yet, for some reason, we're still saying this is the solution. This is the solution. So there is an opportunity, I think, to look at the fact that science has certainly created some amazing tools and products and a vast array of knowledge that we wouldn't have had without it. But we've gotten to a point where undoubtedly we are stripping the resources of this planet, and we're going to run out of those elements. There's only so much that exists on this planet, and the more we continue to extract from it, I know I'm getting probably behind the or beyond the scope of just what science does itself, but scientific understanding leads to these types of actions and events. And so that balancing is necessary for more than just creating harmony between the people and the two different schools of thought. It actually has implications that will determine how livable and how safe our planet is going to be for many, many generations to come. I mean, we've reached a point now where whether you're an environmentalist or not, there is some area of environmental extraction or destruction that each of us could look at and say, okay, that's undeniable, whether it's weather change or, the melting of the polar caps, or the amount of pollutants that's in the air over especially our major cities. The extraction of oil and reserve resources that are causing collapse and damage and pollution to the water structure and water tables in and around those areas. I mean, these are measurable and observable unquestionably negative impacts that are occurring as a result of just this marching out and continuing to produce and create and study, if you will, without any sort of restraint or eye toward longevity and the care of future generations. So it's a much bigger equation, goes much further, I think, beyond than just looking at, can these two paradigms get along? It's why do we want them to get along? What's the crux of that argument? And to me, it's we're talking about hundreds or even thousands of years of the future of humanity right now.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense too, if ultimately the building blocks of life are like a masculine and feminine, a negative and a positive polarity, that and science can even attest to that, how there's like a repelling force and then a magnetic force that's always kind of working together. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to pretend to be able to spew science out like I'm an English major, okay? I'm better with words and poetry and things like this. But I do have an understanding of what we know so far, in that it's very limited, and that as far as like knowing what reality is, there isn't a really good idea because of the fact that there's this fundamental incongruency between these two theories of physics. We have relative, what, I can't even speak right now. General relativity. There we go.
Yeah.
And quantum physics. So that's the biggest thing. And so I think part of the problem is because they're not introducing, they're not willing to kind of integrate spirituality. There's this obsession almost of like it's our physical reality that leads to consciousness versus the other way around. Because I get it, it's tough because it could disrupt the entire, you know, the fundamentals of what we understand to be our physical reality can kind of be turned upside down if we think about it this way, where consciousness plays an important part of shaping our reality. And I
Hmm.
think, I mean, I don't know if this derails our conversation or not, or if it adds to it, but the telepathy tapes, that was a huge podcast of 2024. And I think on iTunes, it actually topped the Joe Rogan podcast, which is freaking interesting, right?
Yeah.
And they really, really kind of touch on this topic of science versus well, like the obstinacy of the materialist paradigm when it comes to
Yeah.
scientific discovery and what monies are spent and contributed. And more disturbingly so is like gatekeeping and the preventing of at least a scientific approach to spiritual matters. What do you think about that stuff?
I think there's a lot to protect is the issue is in fact my oldest daughter is a speech therapist and she's been listening to the telepathy tapes with me and sort of off the record she's been doing some small experimentation with some of her
Nice.
nonverbal autistic clients in her speech therapy sessions even just in the last couple of months, and she'll come
Mm-hmm.
home from those sessions and say, Dad, I got a response. Like I
Oh my
got a
God.
response from thinking for a specific input from a patient, and then that patient uses an electronic device. Oh, by the way, non-assisted, which is one of the controversial issues that the
Mhm.
concretized paradigm folks are using to say that this telepathy is not really happening. And she's using it without any type of parental touch or assistance, just the patient tapping a button on a screen multiple times already. This is just one individual, but she literally a year ago had no opening in her mind for anything spiritual or telepathic or non, she didn't learn it in her course of study going through college and her master's degree. She wasn't open to it. And just through a series of our conversations and listening to this podcast, she's been willing to go try, just to be open-minded
Mhm.
about it and try, and is now coming home like a little kid, just so excited
Oh,
about what she's seeing and what she's finding, and realizing, wait, this is gonna crack open a completely new, not just a new door, but a completely new way of looking at autism and at nonverbals and about the way we think about neurodivergence completely. Because what's coming out of these individuals that we previously have labeled as incapable,
mhm.
as uneducated, incapable of learning, incapable of communicating, some of them are now writing full songs, writing full
Wow.
books,
Yeah.
writing beautiful literature, and
Hmm.
telling us in no uncertain terms, we've been in here all along. We've been inside our
Yeah.
heads with the inability to speak, and you set us aside and had us stare at a corner for 8 hours a day because you didn't know what else to do with us. But now we finally have gotten to the point where we have people willing to attempt an outside the box method of communicating with these largely young people, but some of
Hmm.
them are into their 20s and 30s, the folks in these experiments. Um, the
Yeah.
bottom line is, without going on too long about one specific area of exploration, but it is so poignant because it paints an example of what happens when you take something that has been taught a specific way with no outside possibility of open-mindedness or change, and then a little bit of change happens and it blows open the doors and people realize, wait a minute, there's a whole new area, totally new avenues of exploration here and new learning. And what's really happening? Empowerment. This is all about empowerment. These
Hmm.
individuals that have been supposedly handicapped and limited are now being, they're now being given credit and understanding of for being as intelligent as the rest of us, just not as necessarily as capable of communicating up until now. The
Yeah.
empowerment aspect is um, critical across the complete spiritual paradigm. When somebody has been discounted, this happened to me when I left the military and I started experiencing energies and insights and various forms of understanding and new knowledge that I didn't ever learn in a book, and all of a sudden was sort of just kind of like accessing from somewhere. And then I would talk to people about it and get, as so many people do when they start to explore into these new areas, shut down and get laughed at and get like chastised for even believing or thinking or saying something like that. And so that's not empowering. That's the opposite of empowering. It shuts you down. It causes you to shell up. You become less social. You become less interactive and less confident in yourself. I mean, this has been the story of the spiritual practitioner for hundreds and hundreds of years, at least in our culture. It is the opposite of empowerment right now. If
Yeah,
we start to,
yeah.
no, go
Oh,
ahead.
I mean, so you're talking about empowerment, and it just got me thinking about where we place our value in society, as far as individual value, because these individuals can't speak or because they're, could qualify as being handicapped. We just don't give them any value. And so why are we going to look at them? Right. And then now we're realizing through this podcast, the telepathy tapes, that, oh my gosh, they're actually, they have this incredible way to communicate that we are not capable of doing, that is so rich. And we should look into that. We should study that. They're human beings. And this could be good for us as a species to really look at this. But because it doesn't meet the requirements of it being physical, or we can't wrap our minds around it, we just kind of relegate it as inconsequential, which
Yeah.
is doing each of us a disservice. Every single person, we're being disserviced with this kind of dismissal, because everything is important. And if we can look at every person, everything with that sanctity, we are the ones that are going to benefit. But when we disregard any aspect of the population, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And
Yeah.
and I think that's why this is another reason why it's so important to integrate science and spirituality, because these are the perspectives that we each base our lives around. And don't we want a more holistic, complete picture of that?
I think we're at a point in our human history where we're finding out that without doing that, we're going to continue to fall into discord, into
Mhm.
warfare, into competition, into division. Um, I find it interesting that uh, science has for a while at least offered some theories that pertain to the idea of multidimensionality, multiple dimensions actually existing somehow within our reality. And at the same time, you have individuals that for a very long time have been saying they are picking up on, receiving, getting information from dimensions outside of this physical experience. It it almost seems illogical that you would purport there is this structure, and you have individuals who are saying they're tapping into this and bringing back actual information, and that those two to this point have not married up, and that is not being used as data to support and confirm the scientific theories. It actually could help support and build and further develop the theories that they've been attempting to create and solidify over the course of the last decade or
I
more.
mean, to be
Um,
fair, there are attempts at, including scientific principles in exploring spiritual topics. Like there's those near-death experience studies that have been going on now for decades through like the University of somewhere in Virginia, right? And like the Monroe Institute. So there are these attempts, but they're not mainstream. And I think
right.
that's kind of a ridiculous thing, that there have been attempts by experts, by doctors, by scientists to to learn about spirituality in a very kind of structured way, studies and reports and witnesses and processes and controls, all those things that are considered scientific. There is an attempt, and I don't understand why they're not well known, or they're still relegated to like the spiritual seeker community,
Yeah,
because there's a narrative out there that that's where it belongs, right?
I have a theory about that though, and I was
Mm,
actually I was a volunteer for an organization for several years that had the stated objective of gaining research monies to be able to put toward the research and study
hmm
of um, phenomena that could be considered, they didn't specifically call them spiritual, but phenomenology
hmm
beyond the normal physical experience. Um, and even within that organization, there were still very specific attempts to try to write the grant proposals and the research proposals in the format and in the language and in the manner in which the present scientific paradigm and system would accept. And so they would most often water down and exclude the specifics of these experiences, because the only way that the scientific paradigm acknowledges and understands some of these experiences right now is under the scope of psychopathy or some other form of neurological
hmm
disease or disorder. If somebody comes into a
hmm
psychiatrist and says, I see spirits, I see dead people, and I talk to, the Sixth Sense movie. I see dead people. I see dead people. Mom, what did mom do? Okay, shut up. Don't talk about that. Like we
Yeah.
still have that approach.
Take your
We
pills.
take your pills. So it comes down to, if you're an experiencer of any sort, you kind of start to open up. Even like, I've experienced energy. I've not experienced seeing aliens or ghosts, at least not regularly. And but yet the experience of feeling energy, which is one form of opening oneself up to a realm of experience beyond the physical, has opened my mind to acknowledge, hey, if I can experience this with my energetic or sensory system, then it must be possible for others to experience things that I have not experienced yet. That to me is what has to happen in order for these types of uh, understandings and experiences to begin to be integrated into the scientific paradigm. Is those that are the gatekeepers that you referred to earlier have to, I think, have some form of non physical five sensory associated experience for them to first understand, oh, this does happen. This is something that I can literally, that I can occur and know that this is a real thing. And that, I believe, is what then pops the top off the can to begin to open themselves up to, okay, maybe there is some validity to many or most of the other listed experiences that people are saying that they're
Yeah, for
having.
sure. Because I think something too that is a significant sign that science, though it has served us well as a species, is moving into these masculine shadow traits, is the fact that its purpose has changed. In the beginning, its purpose was so we can understand God and
Mm,
understand, you know, in essence, creation. And now it's like only if it's utilitarian, if our
mm,
findings are going to be useful to whom, right?
yeah.
Profit. There's a lot of profit motivations and technology and in these types, very much again rooted in the physical, but it's about utility, not just for the sake of understanding and uncovering. Because if it really was that human drive to understand and to learn and to discover,
Mm,
spirituality would have been integrated already.
yeah.
Because
You would have left nothing
spirituality,
off the table,
yeah,
right?
spirituality is such a huge part of so many of our lives.
Mm,
And so the reason why it hasn't been integrated is because, again, with the value, it's not considered to be of value. In fact, it's openly mocked by a lot of
mm,
scientists,
mm,
and which is disturbing. Again, like the more we discount aspects of our reality, whether that be people, perspectives, ideas, animals, whatever it is, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Again, that's like the whole purpose of our podcast is to bring everything back into wholeness. And so I think with regard to science and spirituality, there's this misguided nature with science now where it's about utility. And I think that's that is not sexy. It's sexy to think
Mhm.
of science as like, we're just curious as fuck and we want to learn everything. That's great. That's awesome. That speaks to me as a human being.
Yeah.
But when it becomes like sterile and tyrannical in some ways, it's like, no.
There's a quote I think from Jurassic Park where they were talking in the laboratory, and the Jeff Goldblum character brought up the question of, science asks the question whether it can, but very rarely asks the question should it.
Right.
And so I think we've gotten again to a point where we have asked all the can we's, and we've gone and out and done the explorations and realized, yeah, we can do a lot of things, but we are now at the point of starting to realize, wait a minute, some of those things are not only destructive, but they're incapacitative, or they're of no value. Like there are many things that we've done that um, let's look at where we've gone with the space program in our country. Why are commercial space entities now taking over space travel? Because
Mhm.
our scientific space program got to a point where there was no more sort of like exploratory aspect to it.
Mhm.
We went with the been there, done that model. We went to the moon a few times, checked that box,
Have
and then we're
we
like,
have we
okay,
gone to the moon?
well,
I
that's
don't know.
that's
That's another
that's
topic.
a that's a whole nother tangent we could go on, I guess. But we exactly what you were saying before. We ran out of that sort of like
Mhm.
childlike deep
Yes.
curiosity, and it became more about sending the shuttle up and doing experiments in space that could come back and make better Gore-Tex for jackets or something like that. Like
Right.
it all became about go out there and do some experience that'll come back, and then we can use that in some form of new technology.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
become another ivory tower. And I think when that
mhm,
happens, it separates experts from people. When we're all technically scientists in that way where we want to
yeah.
learn and we want to discover, but it's just become this whole another ivory tower, you
Mm,
know, that
yeah.
is like disconnected.
Mm. Very true. Okay, so should we talk about a few ways that we can think of that the two parties could come together and play nice, and maybe start to share notes at the table and get along in the coming years? What do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, I think the first step is to stop with the elitism,
Mm,
and I think that's probably present on both sides. But there's this idea that science is for adults and spirituality is for people who don't want to grow up yet, you
mhm,
know. And obviously, I don't subscribe to that mentality. Now, when I was an atheist, which was just as recent as 2020,
mhm,
I was a little bit of a smartass like that. Like, oh my God, because I grew up very much steeped in like religious Christianity of the type where it was like I was a Jesus freak. I
mhm.
was, proselytizing in high school, which made me so cool. I was like so cool in high school. No, but I
You've gone through
wasn't.
the full range, the entire
I
experience
have.
there.
And so I definitely had, so I know this perspective. I thought religion and spirituality was dumb and all of these things. So I think the very first step is just having mutual ownership of
Mhm,
each perspective. That is number one first thing, is to come at this with respect for each other and to realize that this is for us as a species. This helps us. This isn't an ego trip. This is like,
mhm.
we need to do this so
Yeah.
that we as a people, as a species, as a planet can get the fuck on with our evolution and not get
Mhm.
stuck in this bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Is coming to the table with some humility, and we live again in
Yes.
a paradigm right now where we are still in many ways selecting corporate leaders, political
Hmm.
leaders, bosses for corporations, and military and other leadership organizations that are hardcore and are narcissists and are angry and are profit motivated and are like domineering. Like we're still
Yeah.
in this model that says we must protect ourselves and eliminate all external threats to whatever our
It's
potential
so
our
pompous.
specific organization. It is
It's
and
all,
so
like probably like back in the day with like when science wanted to topple religion. You know how like there's like preachers that get all pompous and pious. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
scientists sometimes have now taken that position of like, oh, I know everything. They're going to start talking like preachers, adding an A after every word.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like those like Southern preachers. I'm joking, but you know what I'm saying? It's like they've grown up to be the new tyrant, the new
Mm.
you know, that the new struggle that we now have to come up against and change.
And you're right, they do exist, but I will tell you, in the last 3 years for me, and it's probably gone on for much longer than that, but I've been introduced to um, personally to dozens and have seen books, videos, and that kind of thing of hundreds of other PhDs, MDs, neuro folks in the mix of doing that work that are now like writing books and publishing articles and literally talking about like there is a something to be considered with the consciousness is
Yes.
primary and the spirit is the predominant existent aspect of the human being, and then everything else emerges out of that. Like there are well-schooled and educated individuals much smarter than I am who are now like capable of not only articulating this stuff but are publicly saying it, and not, I mean, they're selling books, they're getting asked on to talk shows, they're being received with open arms in a lot of ways. It's it's probably still a small percentage,
Hmm.
but it is such a beautiful thing to see that there are individuals that are not only in those career fields that are making the very courageous choice to start elucidating some of their own personal experiences and also putting those into their research and actually doing further research on those types of things. But there are young people now that are coming up and specifically choosing those careers with the intention of like, I'm going to go do psychiatry. I know a young man in Canada. As a matter of fact, I've known him since he was started working on his bachelor's degree, and now he's going to work on his PhD. He's from India, but now he moved to Canada to go work on his PhD. And since the time I met him at probably 19 or 20 years old, he has been saying, I want to go become a psychiatrist so that I can integrate spirituality into medicine.
I love that. That is so
That's my,
promising.
yeah,
I love it.
so he was brought up Christian in India, but developed his own separate independent spiritual practice and started having all kinds of interesting and fun
Hmm.
experiences that led to a sort of new understanding of his own interaction with the divine and reality. And so now he's taken it upon himself to be a leader in a form a philosophical leader in within that community. It's
That's
it's a
amazing.
beautiful thing, not scared to go in and change the mold, and so he's doing podcasting and articles and making spiritual art and all kinds of music and great stuff, like really getting the message out as best he can with also the professional knowledge now and background that he's gotten through his standard core education. So that's what gives me hope, is
Hmm.
realizing that the generations that are coming up now, I've literally seen it in my own family. My daughter a year ago had no belief in anything having to do with non-measurable effects, and now she's experimenting with telepathy and sessions with non-verbal autistic
Yeah,
kids.
I
Like,
mean, it definitely exists. I know there's this woman, she has a doctorate in physics and she has a show on Gaia that explores, her background in
Teresa
quantum
Bullard,
physics.
I think you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. And so
Yeah,
it exists and they're doing it. I just wish that it was
yeah,
more mainstream and that
yeah.
science officially acknowledges these content creators that are these
Mm,
independent researchers that are willing to kind of put their reputation on the line. So
yeah.
there's a lot involved in them doing that. And I think the reason why they feel safe to do that is because they know there is a buy-in from the people.
Hmm.
You out there, you're the people. And I
Yeah,
know that you would much prefer a perspective that takes into consideration things unseen. And and that's why I know there's a hunger for it, because when you were saying that you're noticing these things, I'm sure, with like more interest with people who have backgrounds in science to kind of integrate spirituality. A lot of that has to do with, the decentralization of communication, of data, of information, through the internet, through the fact that they can self-publish their work. They don't have to go through all the
Yeah.
bureaucracy that science is subject to, that makes
Mhm.
them move at the speed of molasses. So I think it's all good. I love that we are leveraging these technological advancements that science has
Mhm.
given us to be able to share these ideas and take more of our ownership back, our power back. And so when you speak about this student, yes, you know why? Because there's an audience for that. Because we as
Mhm.
human beings know it's time. It's fucking time to like not be so stuck. And a lot of the times we're stuck because of these divisions that we experience in our day to day, one of which being science and spirituality. And so that's why me
Yeah.
and Ken here in our podcast, we're going to try to bridge these gaps because this is the way that we can move forward.
It seems like we'll probably get back around to the theme of the evolution of human repression. It's like many of the evolved states of experience that we've gone through over the course of many generations on this planet. Uh, it's things get knowledge, information, understanding gets compacted down, and then it explodes and expands, and then it gets compacted down again and explodes and expands. And I think we're in a state now where the spiritual knowledge and understanding has been compacted down and restrained and held in so far and so long, and yet at the same time, like you were just referring to, the informational understanding. I started reading channeled material 5 or 6 or whatever 7 years ago. Was the first time in my life that I had ever had information enter my mind that opened my mind up as quickly and as and wide as it did. So I mean, literally within a period of weeks. And all of a sudden there was this new framework that existed for understanding how things could be. It didn't prove anything to me, but it at least laid down a new matrix of possibility that then the experiences had something to attach to. And I think that's what where we're seeing this sort of merger between the media and the new availability of information is giving people access to what didn't exist when, well, for instance, the religious order of the day dominated the information space. You only had so much information available to you. So even if you had experiences related to of a spiritual nature, you didn't have the informational architecture built in your mind yet to relate that to anything. So it was easily denied or dismissible. Um, we're building those frameworks now, through discussion, through people being willing to share their
Mhm.
own experiences, good and bad, positive, negative, and getting that information out there. So I would say to anybody out there listening, like, be courageous. Don't be scared about talking. If whether you're interested in science, whether you're interested in spirituality, or you're interested in the topic of bringing them together, the way to do that is to talk about your own experiences. Find people who have common understanding or different understanding than your own, and have discussions with them, and start to bring these things out into the public discourse. As Joanna pointed out, this is going to happen at the individual level.
Oh,
It's not
yeah.
going to be it's not going to be because some university or group of universities decide one day, oh, now spirituality makes sense, and we're going to let that come into our
Mm-mm.
curriculum in ways that it never happened before. It's not going to be because some government says, oh, now, spiritual practice and aliens and all these other things that people have been talking about for years, now they make sense. Now we're going to deliver this all to you, and you're all going to be happy. No, it's going to come now from the bottom up, seeping
Yeah.
from individuals, revealing their own experiences, and through that forcing that integration into those systems that already exist, rather than waiting for them to
Yes.
merge
Power
on
to the
their own.
people.
Power to the
I
people.
love that you brought that up because I was just thinking that when you were saying how you started reading channeled material like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I will tell you, as a former atheist, coming into spirituality, having a spiritual awakening as an atheist, that's a story for another day. But I
I was
had
too as well.
I had some very strong resistance to channeled material. I was like, what the?
Mhm.
Nah. All right, look, you guys, let me I understand there's something more, but I don't know about this channeled stuff, whatever.
Yeah. Uh,
The law of one, though, the law of one got me. And my
yeah.
whole point in saying this is that, yes, I understand. I have a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy for the resistance to something like spirituality entering science, or, like official studies and evidence. I get it. And so I understand. But for me personally, like with channeled material, when I opened myself to it and I allowed it to enter, right, to penetrate. So, not to bring it like, to bring the metaphor into physicality, it's like when men and women have sex, a woman allows the man to penetrate. So, in
Mm,
this way, energetically and metaphorically speaking, sometimes when you are so much more in that masculine, and to balance it out, you have to allow things to penetrate. And so in this
mm,
situation with channeled material, I allowed myself to soften, and I allowed it to enter, and I just, wow, it does things when you can do that, when you can just
yeah.
soften a little bit and allow the integration to happen. And the thing with channeled material is it can just let it pull whatever it needs to pull out of you. Like, how are you receiving this? No one's telling you you have to believe this way, but it's that whole empowerment of what you have. And so when you're saying it's going to happen individually, that is absolutely true. And so the more you allow yourself to soften, right? Because we've been so bombarded with fear, and like you have to always be alert and aware of the dangers around you. We haven't allowed ourselves to just soften and to let that fear go and to listen to ourselves and to our hearts and our intuition. That is going to be our GPS. That's
Mm,
the only thing that's going to guide you towards the right path, not fear. And so that's where it begins. If we want to conceptually talk about the integration of science and spirituality, bring that back to your own level, to what you can do, because that will impact the whole. And what you can do is to get more familiar with your intuition, and try to spend some more time internally versus hanging out here where there's chaos and fear, and you're just bombarded with it. Go back inside and integrate the two, because they
mm.
are both important.
One of the things when you're talking about that strikes me, and we're going to talk about education and the ways that education maybe
Mhm.
can and should evolve over the course of the coming generations
Yeah.
in an upcoming episode. But real quick on that topic, um, one of the things I like to try to do with my kids is when they're taking, for instance, a science class and they learn about the ways that um, the structure of matter, the three phases of matter are being taught right now. I like to not just do the flashcards and have them memorize that and go get 100 on the test. I like to ask some questions about, what do you think about that? Do you think that's accurate? Is that the only way that this could be? It's like asking open-ended questions to
Hmm.
get them to consider, this is the way that this story is. That's all it is. It's just a story that a group of largely men have come up with over the course of a long period of time. And they've sold that story and printed it in books, and everybody's believing that's the story of the way things are structured. Nothing in science is 100% proven. Any scientist will tell you that. They don't do anything for absolute proof. Everything is subject to testing and invalidation.
Hmm.
Their entire model really is based on the continual evolvement of thought and understanding. The problem is that the way that it gets sold to the population and to those of us who are not in the scientific club is as static and law-based formula. Like, this is how it is. There is no opportunity for adjustment. So
Hmm.
um, I guess I would tell anyone, like, if you're going through any type of educational um, program that has anything related to scientific material, or especially if you're influencing children in any way who are, just be mindful that open-minded questions and curiosity can be brought into those discussions without undermining or dismantling the credibility of the information that's being provided right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But Definitely, if we're going to impact the whole, we have to really look within ourselves and how we can integrate those two forces, the physical and the spiritual within ourselves, first and foremost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It starts with the individual. And that's, I think, what we're going to continue to come back to in all these
Hmm.
discussions is,
That's right.
we're all approaching these from a very unique angle. And, what each one of us portrays as our current truth is not necessarily the same as any other. That's what ultimately is going to allow some opening of the doors between these two schools of thought, is individuals releasing their strictures on what they have determined to be truth and realizing potentially what's true for me today might not be true tomorrow, and what's true for me today may not be true for you today. There's a lot more flexibility in the reality system that we live in right now.
Wow, this has been a fascinating conversation. The way we like to close out our show is with a tarot reading. And I did not do a good job explaining how the tarot readings align with our podcast. So I'm going to do that this time. So forgive me, I did not do our tarot segment any justice, but the tarot, for those of you who don't know, it's made up of 78 cards, and each card is representative of an archetype, something that has to do with the human experience. And so that's the logic portion of the tarot, right? Like this card means this, and this is the, and this is the kind of meaning you can derive whenever this card pops up. But then there's this, that's the masculine, that's the structure, the logic. And then there's this aspect of the feminine where, okay, in meditating or in contemplating this archetype, what is the message that it's pulling out of you? And a lot of times tarot readers are channelers. And so messages will come in, relative to that card. And so there's this bridging between the logic and the logic and the intuition. And that's what this our tarot reading kind of represents. It's like, here's this card and here's the message that you can actually take with you and use in your life. And actually, maybe you can open your own intuition and think about what does this message do for me or give for me? Don't let it be the thing that then tells you what to do, but open up your own intuition and see what messages come out of you from what I share with the tarot readings. So I hope that that is clear, that how the tarot can be an example of bridging, you know, the masculine and the feminine structure and potential. And so that's what we're going to do right now is I'm going to pull some
Cool.
cards.
Excellent.
And something so you can take with you after spending all this time with us. We hope that it's been fruitful for you as well.
So how do you normally do it? Do you just pull one off the top, or does it matter like where you actually draw the card from?
Good question. I have this whole thing where I shuffle the deck 3 times in a
Okay.
specific way to kind of
Hmm.
clear the energy of the cards. And then I pull 3 cards. And then based on the cards, a message will come to me about what these cards are trying to say. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cards and I'm going to get my reading and then I'll explain what the cards are
Are you
after.
usually are you usually asking a specific question before doing that, or are you just kind of open-ended pulling cards and then reflecting on what you feel?
Usually I do ask a question, but in this case, this is more of a general reading for the
Mm.
whoever's watching.
Okay.
And so it is more of a general thing. I have a method of tarot reading that I do called therapy. So it's like therapy, but it's therapy. Because I am somebody that I am spiritual, but there's this part of me that always wants to make it practical because we are here on earth. We are not up there. We are here. And so my way of tarot reading is something that involves the person I'm reading for, because I'm somebody that likes to empower others. And so when I do my readings, I want the person I'm reading for to not feel like, or to not be giving me their power, and I'm just going to give them their message. This is about us coming together, almost like a Reiki healing. When you heal with Reiki, it's not the Reiki practitioner healing, it's actually the person coming to be healed that has to believe in it and allow the healing to occur. So this
Right.
is my principle when I do tarot readings is like, you're very much a part of this. So the cards are going to be speaking to you as well. And so when I have my readings, I do engage the person that I'm reading for so that they can start to get more connected to their intuition so that they can integrate the feminine with their masculine, to get more confident and to strengthen that relationship with themselves.
Awesome.
Yeah. So here's my cards, and I'll get my message here. Oh, it might relate to our topic. It might not. I don't know. So we'll
We
see.
shall see.
Okay. So there's a very strong energy about choice, and it's the Lover's card. So it's something that is important for all of us to really consider is the power of choice, the power of free will. Oh, wow. This is very nice. Okay. Because we can continue to be at battle. The cards I've drawn here, so incredible. The Lovers is the center card, and then to the left of it we have the Five of Swords, which is very much about conflict and almost like people losing, but it feels like everybody is losing because of the battle. And then to the right of it we have the King of Wands, which is about power and about yeah, like just it's about power and about being able to get the job done and in a very kind of righteous way. And it's all upright. So to me, the message is very clear. There is a very strong emphasis on our own ability and our choice to make, whether we want to continue down this path of fighting and animosity. And really, it's just a lose-lose that way. Nobody really wins. Or we can go this direction of just like taking ownership of like our experience, and that we're not going to be about fighting. We're going to be about finding solutions. So that goes in line with what we've talked about today, but also just think about how that message can help you throughout the week. There's going to be a lot of choices that we make every day. And of those choices, sometimes we can continue to go a direction that isn't helping, or we can go in a direction that gets us our life back and gives us our mojo back, gets us up on that positive vibe versus one that is continually bringing us down. So that is your tarot message for this week.
Awesome. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, to me, it's again, I think we talked about the times we last week we talked about the times we live in being very polarized, and it's everywhere you look, all you see is one viewpoint and then the other one that is a stark contrast. That's the sense that I get from the spread that you just pulled, is that we are in a period of very obvious contrast, but we have the opportunity individually to look at the fact that things do not have to be black and white all the time. We can look at aspects of the one side that we see as unique and as dynamic and as different, but for good reason, and the things about the other side that also have value that may not necessarily just be pushing against and resisting, but be in some ways beneficial if we actually sit down and look at ways to, just as we were talking about today, to integrate the aspects of the both.
That's right. Yeah. So I do encourage everybody, if you're trying to find a way, how can I do this work internally first so that I can manifest the more, help the world be more unified? Get yourself a tarot deck. Get yourself a tarot deck, pull a card, you can look at the meaning of the card, and then just sit and think about what it's drawing out of you. That's where the feminine can happen, is you just allow what the card is supposed to mean, and then allow whatever comes out, what messages come out for you that's going to help you. Nothing is wrong. There's no wrong way. This is about you and trusting that inner voice and trusting your intuition. Yeah, if you don't have a tarot deck, go ahead and grab one. And to me, I've been using the tarot for so long, like I can look at the card and know what it generally represents, and then the messages come in pretty quickly. Um, but I think everybody can develop their own practice. And
You ever write
just trust
down?
yourself. Hmm?
You ever write down your impressions, like for practice? Do you write them down so you're sort of solidifying that into your mind too, or no?
Because it like draws on energy that's happening right now. I mean,
Mm.
I do sometimes record on my phone. I'll say, okay, this is like my channeled, and then I have to listen to it later because sometimes I don't know what I'm saying all the time as I'm saying it. But I also write things down. But I don't always do it. I feel like when I feel called to do it, I will do it. I just have this like relationship with my inner self that I just hear and I like, okay, I'll write this down, or I might not. So it's very
Yeah,
random. And I
gotcha.
have like different journals of different things. But yeah, what I try to do is I don't try to write long things because I don't ever go back and want to read all that, especially with my
Mm.
handwriting. So I always try to make things very concise, and something that I like to do because I'm an English person. I write little haikus. I love poetry, and I try, and I like precision. So that's like, hey, there's that masculine. I like precision and I just like things to make sense. And then there's this feminine of like, I like poetry and artsy fartsy creativity. And so with the haiku, it's like so perfect. It's like it's got so much structure and limitation. It's like it's got to be 575 syllables, but it also gives me this avenue to create. So I also recommend doing something like that when you have these big ideas, really try to find a way to synthesize it into something small and meaningful so you can look at it later and not have to read like 5 pages of your bad writing
Yeah,
and be
that's good
like, "Oh
advice.
yes, that's right. That's what I know what I'm talking about here." When I
Uh,
when I read that 3 line
simplify.
poem, exactly. So
Nice.
yeah, those are just some things that came off my tongue right now that I want to share with you. So
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks for doing that.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. Please, if you like this video, if we gave you something to think about, or if you've been inspired to get yourself a tarot deck, please like this video and let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you think about the science and spirituality relationship. Is it a battle or is it something that can be mended? You let us know. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, y'all don't forget to go ahead and leave some comments with us. Next week topic, we're gonna have a fun one. We're gonna talk about UFOs. A lot of information in the news lately about what are called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, I think is
I've
the
heard two
acronym.
different things. Yeah,
Have you?
I can't remember what other one I've heard, but it was a different P word. I
Oh,
don't.
okay. They're making up all kinds of stuff just
They
to
are.
confuse us, I
They
think. Who knows?
are.
Who knows? But there's all kinds of different views on where they are, where they come from, who they are, whether it's the government or actual aliens. And so we're just going to throw it all out on the table and talk about like both from a physical paradigm, but also a beyond physical, like what
Hmm.
sorts of information is there out there in channelings and other types of sources that really gets into the sort of more the spiritual and the conscious nature of these phenomena. So
Stay
it'll be a fun
tuned.
one. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, stay tuned. So unless we get drafted by aliens this week, we're gonna
I
we're
mean,
gonna
you
talk
never
about it.
know.
So
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So yeah, guys, remember, every moment offers us a choice. Are we going to build a bridge or are we going to burn one down? It's up to
and
you.
as co-creators of our shared reality, let's choose wisely.
All right. Until next time, guys. See you later. Bye.
Have a great week. We'll see you.